Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm doing an interesting video where I've gone over in recent days some of the closest Senate races and governor's races in the 2026 midterm elections. And if you watch those videos, you know the states I'm talking about. On the Senate map, states like Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Maine, New Hampshire, maybe Ohio, I've mentioned in depth. And on the governor's side of things, governor's races like Nevada, Arizona, Kansas, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Georgia. Today, I want to pick 5 races across the Senate and governor maps in 2026 that I'm calling sleeper races. Races that could potentially be competitive and maybe catch everyone by surprise come election day. Now, obviously not all of these are going to work out this way, but as of today, these are the ones that I'm watching that I think could be very competitive sneakily out of nowhere. I'm going to start with the Senate map. In the first Senate race I'm going to look at that I think could very sneakily be competitive is the Senate seat in the state of Texas. Texas, if you're unfamiliar, this is Senator John Cornyn, and he is running for re-election, but he's facing a Republican primary challenge from Ken Paxton, the Texas Attorney General. The early polling thus far has shown Ken Paxton with a very commanding lead over John Cornyn in these early polls. So unless something changes in the next year or so, it's looking like Ken Paxton may successfully primary challenge John Cornyn. But on the Democratic side of things could potentially get more interesting. Both Colin Allred and Beto O'Rourke, two past Democratic Senate nominees in 2018 and in 2024, are both publicly expressed interest in running again. And the early polling has shown, one poll showed Ken Paxton losing to Colin Allred in this race. Inside Elections, Cook Political Report has it as solid Republican, but Sabado Crystal Ball has it as likely, and Race to the White House has it as lean. Texas has been a very interesting state because at the presidential level, it just voted for Donald Trump in a likely margin at 13.5% in 2024. 2020, it only voted for Trump by 5.6% though. And when you look at the Senate side of things, 2024, Ted Cruz won by 8.5%. 2018, Cruz only won by 2.6%. So Texas, even though for right now I have it starting out as likely Republican, Texas could potentially be one of the sleeper Senate races that might get close out of nowhere and be kind of a shock to everyone like, whoa, when did this get close? In large part due to the fact that Ken Paxton's past scandals as Texas Attorney General, including an impeachment trial and being impeached, could give the Democrats an opportunity at making that race competitive. So that's one Senate seat that I'm watching that I think could potentially be sneakily competitive out of nowhere. Another one we have here is the New Mexico Senate race. So I only have 2 Senate races that I'm looking at in terms of really sneakily competitive because a lot of them we kind of already know how they're going to go. But New Mexico, this is Democrat Ben Ray Lujan. He was elected in 2020 with 51.7% of the vote. He is seeking a second term. The Republicans' hedge fund manager, Nella Dominici, who's the Republican nominee in 2024, has declined to run, so the Republicans don't have a top candidate really in New Mexico at this time. But it did vote for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump by about 6 points in 2024, after being about an 11-point win for Biden in 2020. At the Senate level, New Mexico is also shown to be right around that likely competitive rating. It voted for Martin Heinrich by about 10 points in 2024, but in 2020, Ben Ray Lujan only won by about 6.1%. So New Mexico, I'm not really counting on being a super competitive seat, but I think is one that might be able to get a little bit competitive leading up until the midterms, and one that people should take pause of. So those are 2 Senate seats that I think could be a little bit more competitive than are being talked about. Now I have 3 governor's races I am watching, and one of these, if you've seen my recent videos, might not be too much of a shock, but the Iowa governor's race. Iowa has recently voted for president in the likely Republican rating pretty consistently now, 3 elections in a row for President Trump. At the Senate level, it's also been pretty consistent. Chuck Grassley won by a likely Republican margin in 2022, Joni Ernst by a much smaller likely Republican margin, but a likely Republican margin in 2020 by 6.5%. The governor's race is where there's a little bit more of an opening. Kim Reynolds won in 2022 with 18.5%, but she only won in 2018 by 2.7%. The same type of election environment that should be happening in 2026, or the most comparable anyway. Kim Reynolds is currently not running for re-election due to the fact her polling numbers and such are not really too strong, so she has decided not to run. The Republican primary on this side is currently wide open. Brenna Bird, the Attorney General, is probably the leading candidate to win the nomination if she does decide to run, but the Republican nomination is currently wide open at this time. The Democrats, however, have the Iowa Auditor of the State, Rob Sand, as the only statewide elected Democrat currently as running for the Democratic nomination. He is giving the Democrats a very rare opportunity at potentially making Iowa very competitive and maybe even trying to win this seat. Cook Political Report currently has the race listed as lean Republican, Inside Elections as a battleground, and Sablo Crystal Ball as likely Republican. And it's interesting because the recent election results out of the state of Iowa should not suggest Iowa being a very competitive state. But Rob Sand's candidacy, combined with Kim Reynolds' approval ratings, does put Iowa as a sleeper governor's race I'm watching as one that could potentially get very close. So Iowa I'm watching. We now have two more sleepers to go over. The next one for me, and I'm torn between two of them, but since I already talked about New Mexico in the last Senate part, I am going to be talking about the state of New York. Now you may be thinking, well, what are you talking about? New York's a Democratic state. It's not going to be competitive. And Democratic Kathy Hochul, the incumbent governor, her approval ratings are currently not very strong. They have gone up in recent months, but it's leaving her open to a potential primary challenge from the Democratic Party, as well as U.S. Representative Elise Stefanik potentially running on the Republican side could make this race more competitive than maybe otherwise would be. Cook Politico and Sablo Crystal Ball have this race as likely Democrat. Inside Elections has it as a battleground. The only poll that's been done so far shows in a Republican-aligned poll that it does have Kathy Hochul leading over Elise Stefanik by about 6 points. But we did see a very close governor's race in 2022 where Kathy Hochul only defeated the Republican Lee Zeldin by 6.4%. When you talk about the competitive governor's races for 2026, New York probably won't be top of mind, but looking at a potential sleeper, New York maybe could be in that conversation of potentially being competitive if Kathy Hochul's approval numbers continue to be poor going into November. Now we just have one remaining governor's seat to mention for a sleeper rating, and that is going to be the state of Alaska. Alaska, the Republican incumbent governor Mike Dunleavy is term limited and cannot seek a third term. Alaska has been a pretty reliable state at the presidential level at voting in the likely Republican column. It's voted likely Republican for Trump in all three presidential elections he's been a part of. The governor elections in 2022 was safe Republican for Mike Dunleavy. In 2018, he won by about 7 points over the Democrat Begich, who I believe was the former governor as well. 2014, the independent Walker was able to beat the Republican by about 2.2%. So Alaska does have a precedent of electing very close elections. The main thing I'm watching in Alaska is Mary Peltola, the Democrat U.S. representative who lost in 2024 but won in 2022. She is potentially running for governor in 2026, and that's where things get interesting. Right now, she's publicly expressed interest in running, and she would present the Democrats an opportunity at potentially flipping the governor's race. Now, the Nancy Dahlstrom, the lieutenant governor of Alaska, has filed paperwork to run. She's probably going to be the Republican candidate. In early hypothetical polling so far, Nick Begich versus Mary Peltola, if they were to run for governor, showed a tied race. It is a Democratic-aligned Data for Progress poll. In the Nancy Dahlstrom versus Mary Peltola matchup, it showed Peltola with a 10-point lead over Dahlstrom. Again, very early on in a Democratic-aligned poll, but Mary Peltola starting out that strong and very least puts Alaska in the category of a sleeper race that I'm watching in 2026 that maybe things could potentially get close if Peltola does run, which publicly expressed interest suggests she probably is at least looking at it. If she were to run, this race could become a sleeper in a very competitive race like Iowa, maybe very quickly. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below telling me some other races you think are sleeper races for 2026. Maybe not the so competitive ones, the ones that are kind of going under the radar. I would like to hear what you have to say about all that. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in the next video.